Got the right balance?
Thank you.
We on? Good morning, everyone. Before I start, I'm going to ask those of our allies who are here who have their phones with them to, well, everybody please silence your ringer. I'll do that too. And then if you've got your phone, if you're an ally and want to go to the Ohioans to Stop Executions Facebook page, just search Ohioans to Stop Executions and share the live feed. That would be tremendous. Good morning. My name is Abe Bonowitz. I'm with Ohioans to Stop Executions, and I want to open by welcoming everybody and thank you for coming. I want to share with you in your press kit the second item in behind the press release is a statement I'm going to read from retired Judge James Brogan, who is the chair of the Ohio Supreme Court Joint Task Force on the Administration of Ohio's Death Penalty. He was unable to be with us, and many of the members of the task force would have liked to have been with us, except they were busy today. And of course, the judges are all, see, Judge Brogan is retired. Many of the judges are still active and cannot be involved in this sort of thing, but they're all concerned. They're all concerned similarly to Judge Brogan. As chair of the task force, I find it very troubling that our state is about to resume executions while the most substantive of our recommendations to the legislature lay idle. Those charged with ensuring our capital punishment system is fair and accurate have failed to act. It is my view that if Ohio is to retain the death penalty, it should not resume executions without addressing our body of work, which took nearly 2.5 years to complete and was representative of key stakeholders in the criminal justice system. More than 3 years have passed since we issued our report of 56 recommendations, yet virtually nothing has changed. This lack of action is disconcerting and will enable the core problems we identified to continue and potentially lead to wrongful death penalty convictions. Again, that statement is in your press kit. And also on that statement are the phone numbers of the bailiffs of several sitting judges who are on the task force, Judge Donnelly and Judge Russo. The Common Pleas Court of Cuyahoga County are both willing to address issues related to the work that they did on the task force. Now I want to introduce to you Rex Zent, who is retired from the Ohio Department of Correction and Rehabilitation. Rex?
Good morning. My name is Rex Zent. As Abe said, I'm a retiree from the Department of Rehabilitation and Correction. I worked with the state from 1965 to 1997. The last 26 years I worked in the Department of Corrections. I held several positions. I was a warden at a couple of institutions, which that seems to ring a bell. That's a position everyone can relate to, but there were many other positions that I held during that time. Interestingly, during my entire tenure with the Department of Corrections, there was not an execution in the state of Ohio. 32 years, people were generally shocked to hear that. It wasn't an issue. It certainly wasn't a political issue. It just didn't have one. There were murders happening, there was a death row, but there were no executions. When I retired in 1997, though, you could see the snowball coming down the hill. It was becoming a political issue, debated, heated political issue. Tough on crime was the dialogue, and I saw there was a volunteer, Wilfred Berry, in death row, who was willing to waive all his appeals and be executed. So I had just happened to go to retire. I was talking to Jim Tobin, went to a Highlands to Stop Executions meeting. I said, I wonder what they're doing, and kind of got hooked on this. Had a guy, Mr. Johnson, who called me and asked me, what's your position on the death penalty? And I said, well, I'm against it, but it's never been really an issue in a while. There I was pulled in. He put my name in the paper, and that's a good way to, there's nowhere to hide then. So, but anyway, that's how I got involved in this group, this Highlands to Stop Executions. But then my good friend Terry Collins wasn't that fortunate. He's about 10 years, about 12 years younger than I am. Started in the department, entry-level social worker at Lucasville, worked his way up the ranks. Great guy who took care of all the details. He was the guy who knew everything under the carpet. He took care of all the details. And eventually he became the deputy director, a warden at Lucasville, and the director. He was the head of an agency that has 14,000 employees, 50,000 inmates under their care, and about 30 to 35,000 people under their supervision on probation or parole. An awesome task, the director of the Department of Corrections. Some governors call it the toughest job in the state. Terry's attitude was, you should go to the spot. You don't delegate the big decisions, and you go there. During his tenure, he witnessed 33 executions. Not just witnessing them, he went down to Lucasville, and it wasn't just there to make sure the mechanics operated properly. He was there to talk to the people. Mechanics generally operate properly when Terry's involved in something, but he talked to the victims, the victim's family. He talked to the condemned person's family. He talked to the offender. He talked to the execution team. He talked to the tie-down team. Every time, 33 times, he went down. It's something that most people delegate, frankly. He said, I've got to do it because they're saying, we, the state, people of the state of Ohio. Terry didn't want to talk a lot about how he felt about that, but I knew those lonely trips home at night after he was watching an execution. He frequently told me, he said, why are we doing this? What are we accomplishing? What kind of people are we? We don't have to do it. We have safe places, secure these people. And if those of you who've read much on the death penalty know that really, I could name 100 reasons why just life without parole is an excellent alternative. And it's being more and more used more frequently. So Terry joined OTSE and was their leading spokesperson until, unfortunately, he passed away a little over a year ago, had a massive coronary at 63 years old, and he's gone. And we all miss him. But I know those of us that attended his funeral, and seemed like every warden, ex-warden, correctional employee all felt like Terry took the hit for us. Because most of us would kind of shy away from doing that. We'd maybe do it once and then organize someone else to go down and do it. He did it. I'm not saying those things caused his death. I'm saying it certainly didn't help prolong it any. I can safely say that. So, I am here today to speak on behalf of the more than a dozen correctional professionals from Ohio and across the country who are asking Governor Kasich to reconsider the resumption of executions in Ohio because of the harm to correctional professionals. In the debate about the death penalty, people generally forget that when a state executes a person, it's not the state carrying it out, it's professional people, men and women, who work in corrections. We dedicate our lives to the care and safety of prisoners. We keep the public safe by ensuring that prisoners in our care are safely locked away from the rest of society, and we think we do that pretty well. Within the corrections community, it's well known that executions take a huge toll on staff who carry them. You've probably read numerous articles, particularly Texas, who leads the nation in doing executions. Many people feel literally haunted, talk about nightmares, stress, anxiety, and people turn to alcohol and even suicide. That's how severe it can be. We're talking about an execution team that is very professional, competent and committed, and they haven't carried out an execution, however, in nearly 3.5 years. And they will be using a lethal injection procedure that has never been used. In fact, the drugs Ohio is planning to use have repeatedly been implicated in executions that did not go well, did not go as planned. Ohio's last execution did not go as planned and lasted 26 minutes. Before that, Ohio corrections professionals had to endure a horrific botched execution attempt that lasted 2 hours and ended with a living but injured prisoner and what we can only imagine were highly traumatic staff. How can we be certain that nothing wrong in any one of the next 27 executions will occur? If being part of an execution team can be emotionally hard on corrections workers when all goes well, just imagine the psychological damage that is caused when the execution doesn't go well, or when the executions professionals are thinking about the men exonerated from Ohio's death row and worrying about the reliability of death sentences as they are tasked in carrying them out. There was an easy way for the state to do more to protect correctional officers. It could have implemented the recommendations of the Joint Task Force that Abe talked about that studied the death penalty in Ohio. It could have had better safeguards in place against wrongful conviction and helped correctional professionals more confident they're more confident in the guilt of the men on death row. But these recommended changes have not been made. Corrections workers have long dedicated and are caring professionals who deserve consideration. That is why we are asking Governor Kasich to halt the execution schedule until there's less risk associated with implementing it in the death penalty in Ohio. Correction professionals deserve nothing less.
Thank you, Warden Zent. In your press packet, and if you have not received yet a press packet, I know a few people just came in while Mr. Zent was speaking. In your press packet includes a copy of the letter that is to be delivered to the governor immediately following this press conference. Also in your press packet is a list of the recommendations that will be referred to by our next speaker, who is one of Ohio's death row survivors. I would like to introduce to you and please welcome the chairman of the Board of Directors of Witness to Innocence, Kwame Ajamu.
Good morning. As you've heard, my name is Kwame Kamau Ajamu, and I, along with my brother, Wiley Bridgman, and my good friend, Ricky Jackson, were tried, convicted, and sentenced to death row in Ohio in the year of 1975. It would take 3 decades before my exoneration, which came November of 2014, marking in numerical order Ricky Jackson being 148, my brother Wiley being 149, and myself being 150 men to be exonerated and freed from a death row in Ohio. In addition to being a member of Ohioans to Stop Execution, as it was aforementioned, I am also the president of Witness to Innocence. Witness to Innocence is an organization comprised solely of former death row survivors. We are an organization aimed at the empowerment of our organization's membership and the eradication of the death penalty. I am one of the 9 Ohioans who was exonerated and freed from death row in Ohio. DNA was never a factor in my case, as in my case there was a 12-year-old kid who was exonerated, who would exonerate me by having been coerced first and later, after 30 years, coming back to recant his statements against us. The police had made this young man do such a devastating testimony against us simply by holding his family as hostage for his testimony. I know I'm off script here, but his mom, just so that you would know, his mom had ovarian cancer. And the article read that they would tell her to go to prison instead of him for his testimony. And so we be clear. With 27 executions scheduled in Ohio, I'm here to tell you that there's a great possibility that at least one of those people could be like myself and the 100 and now 58 others innocent of the crimes charged against them, forced to be executed. I don't know who it is. None of you know who it is, and neither does Governor Kasich. And this is why I stand here today with representation of myself, Dale Johnston, Joe D'Ambrosio, my brother Wally Bridgman, Ricky Jackson, Derek Jameson, Timothy Howard, who is no longer with us. He passed away. His co-defendant, Gary James, and last but not least, a very good friend of mine who I haven't seen in years, Mr. Gary Beeman. We started a petition just a couple weeks ago, and this letter, we have yet today some 30,000 petition signers, and I would urge everyone in the listening audience to sign the petition as well. The concerns about wrongful convictions in Ohio, there's been a panel to study these issues. And the greatest concern, as is a concern with all of us who champion death penalty issues, is that in the 3.5 years that these people have studied these executions, the task force reported that more than 3 men have been exonerated in the last 3 years. And yet, we're going to start executions with the same system, the same drugs that we used in two botched executions that I know of. One, I personally did a video of myself. If you like the death penalty, who among us is okay with executing an innocent man? At least the governor should wait. Let's tell the governor to wait. Let's make this system better, accurate. How can you make a system better to kill someone? You have the power. We all have the power within us as we convene now. We just need to take it to the governor, sign the petitions, make the phone calls, stand in line and march. Please help us end this tragedy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kwame. Again, in your press kit is a list of what we think are the 13 of the 56 recommendations, which, if enacted, could help prevent, singularly or collectively, a potential wrongful conviction and potential wrongful execution in the state of Ohio. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Carl Ruby, who's the senior pastor at Central Christian Church in Springfield.
I'd like to start just on behalf of the citizens of Ohio apologizing to Kwame for what happened, and just realize that when Ohio imprisons an innocent person, all of us bear the guilt for that. And when Ohio executes an innocent prisoner. We all share that responsibility, and I want to extend my apologies, as I'm sure many would. I'm the pastor of a socially conservative evangelical church, and I'm here because injustice is here. I think more importantly, I'm here because I think Jesus would be here. I am a Kasich Republican. I'm a conservative Republican who cares about the poor, care about the addicted, care about the displaced, and I certainly care about the imprisoned. I'd like to just briefly reference what I think is one of the governor's favorite scripture passages, and it's Matthew chapter 25, where Jesus talks about caring for people who are the least of these, caring for people who are most vulnerable. And Christ said, "I was in prison and you came to me." Then he argues that when we care for prisoners, it is as though we are caring for Christ himself. And then he states the same principle negatively and says that when we don't care for prisoners, it is as though we are turning our backs on Jesus Christ. So I'm here today to ask the governor to listen to his faith. I'm grateful for the chance to be with you today. The death penalty is an issue that I have had a relatively recent change of heart on. And I welcome this opportunity to share my thoughts with you. I hope the governor will decide not to proceed with the 27 scheduled executions because there's too much risk that we will execute a person like Kwame who is innocent of the crime that he has been charged with. And there's very little benefit. This is why today I'll be delivering a letter signed by 200 other faith leaders like myself asking the governor to delay these executions until we can be sure that we have a just system that protects the innocent and makes sure that all people have the legal representation that they deserve. I used to believe that the Bible endorsed capital punishment, but as I reflected on it, I realized that if capital punishment were enforced the way it is enforced in Ohio, Moses would have been executed. He's a murderer. We would not have the Ten Commandments. We wouldn't have the first 5 books of the Bible. David conspired in murder. We wouldn't have the Psalms. And Paul stood by and encouraged mobs to murder Christians. We would not have most of the New Testament. So I've reconsidered what I think Scripture calls us to on this topic. And oddly, it wasn't the Bible that started my change of mind. It was, I like John Grisham novels. And John Grisham wrote a book, this is not a novel, true story, called The Innocent Man. We told a story of a man, a minor league baseball player, who was aspiring to a professional career in the majors, and he was accused of a crime he did not commit. He spent 11 years on death row, descended into a state of major mental illness before he was exonerated. He was exonerated when he was 50 years old, and shortly after that, he died. When I read that book, I assumed that was an anomaly, that was rare, hardly ever happened, and was just a troubling story. Read another book by a person named Brian Stevenson called Just Mercy, and I realized that this was not an anomaly, but that it happens all the time, especially to people of color, and especially to people who are poor, people who are marginalized. And that's why I have changed my mind on the opinion. My faith has led me to look deeper into this issue, and I think that, I guess one thing that I want to say is evangelical leaders and just people of faith are people who care about justice. And we are not asking that the state turn its back on people who commit serious crimes. We are in favor of hard life sentences for people who commit despicable crimes. But the death penalty eliminates the possibility of realizing that we got it wrong. And that's why, as faith leaders, we are against the current policy as it exists in Ohio. It's interesting that even some of our own leaders, people like Jim Petro, have changed their mind on the death penalty because of the realization that mistakes are not only possible, but they're really pretty common. 150 people nationally, 9 people here in the state of Ohio. And what really grips me about Kwame's story is that he was on death row for 30 years. And I hear some people, Derek Jameson's another friend of mine who's spent over 20 years on death row. I've heard some people say, well, what we need a system that delivers the penalty quickly. People shouldn't languish 25 or 30 years. If people are deserving a death penalty, we should execute them quickly. If that had happened, Kwame wouldn't be here with us today. So that to me is a strong argument in favor of changing our position. Also, just the use of resources. When I think of the money that is spent on prosecuting people who are on death row, the Dayton Daily Journal estimated it was $16.8 million. That would buy 168,000 doses of Narcan. And I think of communities like Middletown, Ohio, like Springfield, Ohio, that are struggling to save lives of people who are addicted in the opioid crisis. 168,000 doses of Narcan every year. This is a life and death issue, and right now we are sided with death. My Savior is a Redeemer, and another factor that was a part of my decision is just realizing that people change, and when 30 years go by before we execute a criminal, even if the person is guilty, the person we are executing is a changed person. They often are completely different than the person who committed the crime 20 or 30 years ago, and the death penalty serves no useful purpose at that point. We're executing a person, even if the person is guilty, who is a different person than the young person who committed the crime decades ago. So that's why today I will be delivering a letter to Governor Kasich, signed by 200 other faith leaders, asking that the governor put a stay on executions, that he not begin with his process of reinstituting the death penalty until we have been able to make sure that precautions are in place that protect people like Kwame. And I'm hoping that the governor will listen to his faith. I'm hoping that he will follow Jesus' call to listen to people who are in prison, and that he will not find himself guilty of turning his back on Christ by failing to look very carefully at what's happening with people on death row. So thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, Pastor. Again, for those of you who have just arrived, please see Hannah Cubbins in the back, the young lady in the white dress. She's got press kits for each of you. And also, Carl mentioned the letter that we'll be delivering to the governor from the faith leaders. This is the text of the letter. It's in your kit. This is the text of the letter from the exonerees. It's in your kit. And if those of you who received our press release directly will receive links to these online where you can see all the signatures. We're not going to waste a bunch of paper printing out all these thousands and thousands of signatures, but you'll get links to them. And if you did not receive that press release directly, please be sure to see Hannah, give her your email address, and you'll receive it shortly after the press conference is over. And that has links to other resources as well. Our next speaker is Jim Tobin with the Ohio Catholic Conference.
Good morning. The Catholic Conference of Ohio is pleased to join with these assembled colleagues working to end executions. I would like to read from the letter Archbishop Dennis Schnurr sent to Governor Kasich on behalf of all the Catholic bishops of Ohio. And I believe it should be in your press packet as well. Dear Governor Kasich, I urge you out of mercy to commute the death sentence of Ronald Phillips to life without parole. Governor, we know from our past discussions that you sincerely strive to be guided by Christ's grace and mercy. Our state has burdened you with a morally grave responsibility to sign or not sign an execution order. We urge you to act with courage and choose life. The Catholic Church believes that the death penalty is unnecessary and systemically flawed form of punishment. We seek mercy for Mr. Phillips because we believe that spiritual conversion is possible and that all life, even that of the worst offender, has value and dignity. We offer our prayers and condolences to the family and friends of young Sheila Marie Evans. We pray for Mr. Phillips and his family and friends. We pray for you, Governor Kasich, and all who must participate in our state executions. We look forward to the day when the death penalty is only remembered as part of Ohio's history. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Our next speaker is Tom Smith with the Ohio Council of Churches.
Good morning. My name is Tom Smith, and I'm the Public Policy Director for the Ohio Council of Churches. Our membership extends across this state, encompassing 4,500 congregations and 2+ million members. We are proud to stand in partnership with Ohioans to Stop Execution and the other allies present here today. The Ohio Council of Churches first called for ending Ohio's death penalty in 1972. The problems we cited then are still present today. Ohio does not need to resume executions. We can hold dangerous offenders accountable and protect ourselves from them without more killing. More important, the risk associated with starting up executions and scheduling so many of them are not worth it. We risk botching executions, as has happened too many times in our state already. We risk executing an innocent person. We've had 9 exonerations so far. We are asking the correction workers who have to carry out executions in all of our names to risk their own mental and emotional well-being, as we know from the experiences of those who've done this in the past. And we risk Ohio's reputation in the world. We ought not to be known as the Texas of the North when it comes to the death penalty. In January, when we faced our last execution threat, we sent nearly 10,000 postcards to Governor Kasich, urging him not to resume executions. We did that as Christians and other people of faith, together with our partners at Faith in Public Life and Ohioans to Stop Executions. Governor Kasich has allowed executions, and he has shown grace by extending mercy. We are urging Governor Kasich to change Ronald Phillips' death sentence to death in prison, which is a more accurate way of saying life in prison with no possibility of parole. We are praying for the family of Sheila Marie Evans and for all homicide victims and their families. We are praying for the family of Ronald Phillips, and we are also praying for the correction workers who keep us safe from dangerous criminals and who, God forbid, may one day again have to kill in our names and in names of all of the people of our state. There's no need to resume executions, Governor Kasich. We call on you to lead us away from violence and vengeance. As horrendous as the crimes have been, we urge Governor Kasich to show mercy toward those who are to be executed and to lead Ohio in a direction of grace, mercy, and hope by not allowing the resumption of executions. The Ohio Council of Churches is as committed as ever to working to end the death penalty in Ohio, and beyond it is my honor to stand here with you all today and going forward. I would like to give you 2 examples that I follow. Desmond Tutu gave this insight: to take life when life has been lost is revenge, not justice. Victor Hugo, author of the Les Miserables, what say the law? You will not kill. How does it say it? By killing. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. You also have in your press kit a copy of the postcard that was delivered, almost 10,000 of them, when we were looking at the execution date that was back in January. Our final speaker this morning, actually two people, one will be speaking, and they're both together as co-chairs of Ohioans to Stop Execution's Murder Victim Services Project, and that is our board chair, Melinda Elkins-Dawson, and Lashana Jamu.
Hi, everybody. My name is Melinda Elkins-Dawson, and standing with me is LaShawn Ajamu. Her brother was murdered in Canton in 1997, and as Abe said, we do co-chair the Ohioans to Stop Execution's Murder Victims Families Project. I also chair the board of directors of Ohioans to Stop Executions. It may surprise some people to know that a survivor of a horrific crime is part of the effort to stop executions. My mother, Judith Johnson, was murdered in 1998, and that is what brought me where I am today, because my husband at the time also was wrongfully accused and faced the death penalty. He ultimately was given life in prison and not get the death penalty, but he was innocent. And that said to me that the state can make mistakes. That really opened up my eyes to what the death penalty was all about. We faced it. A few years later, when Clarence was exonerated, we found out who my mom's killer was. And I asked the prosecutors to not charge him with a capital murder. I did not want Earl Mann to get the death sentence. The reason why is this was 7.5 years later after my mother's murder, and I had dealt with such violence from that murder that I did not feel that I wanted to encounter any more violence, any more killing, and deal with it for the next 20 to 30 years. That is not fair to the victims that are left behind. The resumption of executions in Ohio will not serve victims, and I'm outraged on behalf of all Ohio victims of violent crimes that our state plans to move forward with 27 executions as though that constitutes helping us. There are many ways the state could and should use its resources to help us, the victims left behind. For example, one of the recommendations of the Supreme Court task force on the death penalty was to examine the needs of murder victims' families and the resources available to them. Some of us received literally zero support or services from the state, like LaShawn here and myself. While our state spends millions on the death penalty, the committee supposedly addressing our needs, the needs of victims' families, has produced absolutely nothing. Nothing. We gave that committee all of the information we could, including producing a list of needs of victims' families that is informed by our own experience. And that list is included in your materials, and I hope that someday they use it. It's pretty clear to me that when state officials and others say we have executions so that the victims' families can have justice, well, I say that's just political grandstanding. I've been through it. When Earl Mann was being charged and the capital murder case came up on his charges, I faced the prosecutors and I demanded that we not let him face the death penalty. And they were fighting me. I had every right in the world to decide what that person, that killer, was to get. Ultimately, I won out. He pled guilty, and the death penalty was taken off the table. The death penalty is not brought consistently to the worst cases with the worst crimes. That is a fraud. It's sought and won in a very inconsistent manner that has nothing to do with what victims want and need. Of the thousands of murders in Ohio since our capital punishment law was enacted in 1981, there have been 53 executions. How can it be true that executions are for victims' families when we use them so infrequently? If some people's murders merit the death penalty, why do other people's murders not merit the death penalty? Aren't all victims equally valuable? Are we not valuable as victims? In my case, it was my mother that was murdered and my husband that was facing the death penalty and ultimately convicted of her murder wrongfully. That left me out of getting any services whatsoever provided by the prosecutor's office in victim services. And my children, absolutely not $1 was given to us to help us through this nightmare. If someone were to say back at that time that, of course they didn't talk to me about this because Clarence was facing the death penalty, but if one of the prosecutors would have said to my family, which I'm sure they may have, that this will bring closure, I believe he probably, on the note of my family who totally abandoned me and believed that Clarence was guilty, I believe that if they wanted the death penalty, he probably would have gotten it. If executions represent justice for victims, what do politicians say to the vast majority of us, where the so-called justice of an execution is never even possible? All that money spent for something that's not going to go through. The silence is deafening. You know, we're in a fight, we're in a battle right now. Victims' families need accurate, reliable convictions of those who commit crimes. Victims' families need support and resources. Victims' families don't need an endless appeal and media coverage that come with the death penalty case. LaShawn and I, and many others, know that an execution wouldn't have helped our families heal. When they finally caught the man who killed my mother, I insisted, as I said, not to seek the death penalty. And today, given the possibilities of executions resuming next week, I want to point out that Ohio does a disservice to families when the killer is sentenced to death, because the family has to put their healing process on hold for decades through the capital punishment appeals process. Ohio has 27 prisoners currently scheduled for execution. 8 of them will have been on death row longer than 30 years. And by the time of their scheduled executions, 12 will have been there longer than 20 years. When the killer of your loved one is on death row, you can never rest. You are forced to relive the crime with every appeal and every news article. It's not healthy, and it's not fair. Without a death sentence in our cases, we begin our healing process as soon as the trial is over. If there had been a death sentence, we probably would still be waiting. Governor Kasich has an opportunity to be merciful here to all families affected by homicide in Ohio. I hope he hears us and decides stop wasting our state resources on executions and do better for all murder victims' families. Thank you.
Thank you both. Again, I want to draw your attention to the letter from corrections officials, and I want to make sure you know that Warden Zent is going to have to leave shortly, so we have a brief time for questions with him, and then we'll break, and then a short time for one-on-ones with some of our speakers, and then we're going to gather, and some of us are going to carry these petitions over and deliver them to, we have an appointment at the governor's office to deliver the petitions. Of course, y'all are welcome to join us on that walk across the street. So are there any questions for Warden Zent? Would you like to come back up, please?
I don't know if this is for the warden or not, but I mean, you've been here before, you've held press conferences before, in similar situations. Do you get the feeling that there's something different this time?
Is there something different this time? You know, I've been doing this for a very long time. The first round number execution I was protesting was 400, and now we're approaching 1,500. You know, no, there's nothing different here. It's one more time when we're waiting, and it's going to come down to the U.S. Supreme Court or the governor making a decision. And that's one of the things that Melinda was referring to in terms of what this does to victim families, the stress it puts on corrections workers, on everybody in the system. Warden Zent, would you like to address that? Can you come back up to the microphone? Or?